Ibram Kendi is an assistant professor of African American history at the University of Florida. His second book, Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, was recently published by Nation Books. Stamped won the 2016 National Book Award for Nonfiction. Described as engrossing and relentless, Stamped was featured in the Washington Post 2016 summer reading list. Kendi is also the author of the award-winning book, The Black Campus Movement, Black Students and the Racial Reconstitution of Higher Education, 1965 to 1972. Kendi has published 14 essays in journals and books, as well as many op-eds in a number of publications, including Salon, The Huffington Post, The Chronicle of Higher Education, and Truth Out. He has received research fellowships, grants, and visiting appointments from a variety of universities, foundations, professional associations, and libraries, including the American Historical Association, Library of Congress, National Academy of Education, Spencer Foundation, Lyndon B. Johnson Library and Museum, Rutgers Center for Historical Analysis, Brown University, Princeton University, and Duke University. A native of New York City, Kendi lives in Gainesville, Florida. Please welcome Kendi to the stage.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How is everyone doing? I understand you just got back from break. So that means no one should fall asleep this morning. You should be all well rested. Of course, I'd like to thank Lauren for the introduction. I'd like to thank Bob for this invitation. It's truly an honor to be here. Thank you all for coming, even though I know it's required. Thank you to the faculty for being here. I would like to just spend a few minutes talking about my new book, Stamped from the Beginning, which is a definitive history of racist ideas in America. And what I'd like to do is really speak about some of the overarching findings of this text. And so I literally, for several years, researched close to 600 years of racist ideas and wrote a narrative, wrote a comprehensive narrative of the origins of racist ideas from the origins to the present. And so, I had a lot of interesting moments reading through many of these theories, and I want to sort of speak to you about some of my findings, if that's okay. Is that okay? Like, I guess so, that's what you're going to talk about. So, first and foremost, in order to write a history of racist ideas, the first thing that I had to do was define a racist idea. And as many of you would imagine, it was an extremely controversial enterprise to simply define what a racist idea is. And it is so controversial because in our time, there is no one who is willing to admit that their ideas are racist. And what we experience in our time is indicative of American history. So I've yet to come across a single person who has been willing to admit that their ideas are racist. So whether that's slaveholders, segregationists, or even people today, everyone has made the case that their ideas are the truth. They're either God's law, science's law, nature's law, logic. There was some sort of truth in what they're saying. I'm just telling it like it is. And so that makes it, of course, extremely difficult to simply define a racist idea. And this book specifically focused on anti-Black racist ideas about Black people. And I realized that everyone who had actually defined racist ideas tended to define their ideas outside of racism. So some people had defined it previously, but they tended to define it in a way that allowed it such that their ideas about Black people or other groups would not be racist, right? Because, any definition, you're drawing a line in the sand. And so people wanted to draw themselves outside of racist ideas. So to give an example, historically, racist ideas have been defined as notions of biological and genetic and permanent distinction and inferiority. So to give an example, if somebody says that people of African descent are biologically distinct and genetically inferior, that is traditionally how people would define or associate a racist idea. So what that then means is those who state that black people are, let's say, culturally inferior or behaviorally inferior, based on that definition of biology and genetics, those aren't racist ideas. And so ultimately, I ended up defining a racist idea very simply as any idea that suggests a racial group is superior or inferior to another racial group in any way. It's very simple. Any idea that suggests a racial group is superior or inferior to another racial group in any way. So very simply, racist ideas connote racial hierarchy. Certain groups are superior, other groups are inferior, while anti-racist ideas, which I also chronicle in the book, state that the racial groups are what? Equal. It's just that simple. And when I say racial group, I'm not just referring to, let's say, black people in general or even white people in general. Black women are a racial group. Black men are a racial group. The black poor are a racial group. Black lesbians are a racial group. Even black students are a racial group. And so I don't just chronicle the history of ideas that suggest that black people in general are in some ways inferior. I also chronicle those ideas that suggest that black women are inferior, or black men are inferior, or the black poor. And I should say that in our time, we don't say black people are inferior. What we say is, these are the things that are wrong with black people. Which, if you were to really think about it logically, what that means is that group is inferior, substandard. There's something wrong. The reason why this is so important, and has been so important historically, is because throughout American history, there have been racial disparities or racial inequalities. Of course, those inequalities emerged during slavery, in which you had black people who were enslaved, generally, and white people who were free. And so people tried to explain, why is this the case? Why is it the case that black people are enslaved and white people are free? And what racist ideas did is it explained it for people. It normalized it for people. It said to people, you know what? Black people should be enslaved because they are inferior. They are meant for slavery. They are barbaric. They are not intelligent. They are fit for slavery. And so it normalized slavery for people. And it still does that today. So probably the most prominent racist idea, and I would also say the most dangerous racist idea, is an idea that many people hold, is an idea that I held. And I should say I held because when I defined a racist idea as such, I began to realize that even black people had consumed and expressed racist ideas about black people. And so the book chronicles racist ideas produced and consumed by a number of different people, even people who happen to identify as black. And so this racist idea I'm referring to is the idea that black neighborhoods are more dangerous, which of course is a very prominent idea and has, I think, been extremely important in the national discourse over the last few years with the debates about people being killed by police. And even the debates about people being killed by police, there's a racial disparity. That racial disparity is, one study found that young black men were 21 times more likely to be killed by police than young white men. 21 times more likely. Now again, it's either, there's only really two ways to explain any disparity between groups. There's only two ways to explain any disparity between groups, or even between teams. I'm a huge Knicks fan. Anybody a Knicks fan in here? All right, cool. I think the Knicks lost last night, right? Yeah. I was in New York, and I was thinking about going to the game, and I'm happy I didn't, because I would have spent this money to go to the game, and because they lost by double digits, I think, to Oklahoma City. But anyway, so even as it relates to teams, you have two teams, right? And in these two teams, let's say if these two teams play each other regularly. Does Taft have a rival in sports? Who's your rival? Hopkins? Hodgkins. Okay, I'll just call it H. How does that work? Because I don't want to offend nobody. So let's say if H, let's say if you play them in, I'll say basketball, that's my sport. For the last 50 years, every year you played them in basketball. It's, of course, the biggest game of the year. In every single year, H beat the Taft School. Every single year. They were the winners, constantly. There's only two explanations. One explanation, which I'm sure students and faculty who go to H will say, they're a superior team. They're superior. Just like they're a superior school, they'll say, than Taft. That's the reason why they're on the winning end constantly. But I'm sure some of you would say, no, they cheated. The rules are in their favor, which is why they continue to win year after year. And so if we relate that to race in America, whites historically have been on the winning and living end of American society, while blacks have been on the losing and dying end. And there's only two explanations. Either white people are superior, which is what people have long made people believe, or that the rules favor white people, or what people would call racial discrimination, racist policies. And so what happens is you have people on the teams that may know about the rules or may not know about the rules, but they still work hard and they try to still win. But that doesn't mean that the rules that favor that team don't exist. So what racist ideas have long done is said that the reason why whites are on the winning end of these racial disparities, the reason why white people have 15 times more wealth than black people, the reason why whites are twice as less likely to be unemployed than black people, the reason why blacks typically live or more likely to live in poor neighborhoods is because white people are superior. Black people are twice as likely to be unemployed because they're lazy, because they're unqualified, because they don't want to work, because they like to live on welfare. All of these ideas that I would classify as racist. But not only are these ideas racist, they're not true. They've never been verified. And so I studied 600 years of ideas that state that there's something wrong with black people in many different ways, and none of them have found themselves to be true, including the idea that black neighborhoods are more dangerous than white neighborhoods. And some of you are like, okay, you have to prove that to me. How is it, in any way, could you say that black neighborhoods are not more dangerous than white neighborhoods? Well, they're not. And the way we can think about this is it comes very simply. First and foremost, people say that the reason why black neighborhoods are more dangerous is because black people commit more crimes. And that's the reason why 40% of our incarcerated population in this country is black, even though black people only represent 13% of the population, because black people commit more crimes than other people. Well, that's actually not true. So most people who are in prison today are in prison for drug-related offenses, typically nonviolent, possession-related drug offenses. And we know through studies that the racial groups sell and consume drugs at similar rates. So black people, even though they're 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 times more likely to be arrested and incarcerated for a drug crime, black people consume and sell at similar rates. So even though on the TV we like to watch these shows in which you have these suburban white kids driving into black neighborhoods to buy drugs, That certainly happens, but that's not the norm. Most white people, as most of you know, get their drugs from other white people. Just like most black people get their drugs from other black people. And most Latinos get their drugs from other Latinos. And some of you laugh because y'all know what I'm talking about, right? So, but we somehow, that's the irony of it. You have so many white people in this country who get their drugs from white people, but still somehow think that the prototypical drug dealer is black. Like, how does that work? So, what that means is that the disparity in arrest and incarceration rates, and even our conception that more drug crimes are happening in black neighborhoods, is not based on reality. It's not based on reality. But then you're like, okay, all right, I take that drug stuff. Okay, it is the case that, you know, you have all these stop and frisk programs in black communities, and our incoming president wants to create a national stop and frisk program just in black neighborhoods and Latino neighborhoods, which of course will give police officers the ability to stop and frisk and find marijuana on a young black teen who's just headed to school, who's a straight A student, and now he goes to jail, while in a different neighborhood that wouldn't happen. Okay, I can understand that drug stuff, but what about the homicides? Isn't it the case that more homicides happen in black neighborhoods? Well, what we also know from studies is that there's a direct correlation between violent crime levels and unemployment levels across racial groups. There's a direct correlation. So you take any racial group, you have a spike in the number of people who are unemployed, you're going to have a spike in the amount of violent crime. Any racial group. So what that means to me, as a scholar, as an intellectual, is that there's no such thing as a violent black neighborhood. But there is a such thing as a violent, unemployed neighborhood. You see the distinction? Does everybody see that distinction? There is a such thing scientifically as a violent, unemployed neighborhood. But there's no such thing as a violent black neighborhood. Because if there was a such thing as if there was a connection between violence and violent crime and unemployment rate, then the middle income black neighborhoods would have just as much violent crime as those neighborhoods with high levels of unemployment. It would be the same level because, of course, you put black people anywhere, they're going to commit violent crime. But that's not the case. Just like, but then we think, okay, why is it that we understand these neighborhoods, these violent neighborhoods, as black neighborhoods instead of unemployment neighborhoods? Well, I'm sure most of you can understand what that would force American leaders to do to fight crime. Right? Instead of us thinking we're going to put 1,000 police officers on the street, instead of us thinking we have to civilize black people away from their criminal immorality, instead we would have American politicians and other leaders would be forced to fight crime with what? Jobs. It's a very simple thing. And studies show over and over again that if you flood a neighborhood with jobs, violent crime will be reduced. So we should also know that one of the major forms of violent crime that studies show white men in particular are most involved in are not even understood as violent crime, and that is drunk driving. One study found that 75% of drunk drivers are white men. We also know that more people every year die from drunk driving deaths than they do homicides. But the communities where those drunk drivers live, they're not even conceived of as dangerous because they're drunk drivers there, because those drunk drivers just happen to be white. And to be dangerous in this country is to be black. To have a dangerous neighborhood in this country is to be a black neighborhood. And so that then compels people, even when they have a rash of drunk driving deaths to not even understand their neighborhood as in some ways unsafe, because to have an unsafe neighborhood in this country is to be in a black neighborhood. But it's certainly not true. So, you know, that's one of the most popular racist ideas that many Americans have, including black Americans who live in some of these neighborhoods. And I grew up in Jamaica, Queens. In a neighborhood I didn't realize it was considered to be so dangerous until I left and started reading about people calling urban black neighborhoods so dangerous, because, you know, there were people around the way who you probably want to stay away from, but for the most part, we played outside and enjoyed life. And I had a wonderful childhood. And so I should say in closing that what I found through studying the history of racist ideas is that in many ways we need to rethink how we understand the origins of racist ideas. And so we've been taught this history that racist ideas emerge out of ignorance and hate. So those of us who challenge racist ideas, when we hear somebody say something that's racist, the first thing people say is, oh, that person is so hateful. They're saying hate speech. They are so ignorant. And so we think that ignorance and hate is what produces racist ideas. And we have also been taught that it's these people who have these racist ideas, these are the people who have created racist policies like slavery, segregation, or even now mass incarceration. And what I found through studying the motives behind the major producers of racist ideas, and I distinguished the producers of racist ideas from the consumers. So I didn't write a book on the people who were reading books. I wrote a book on the people who were writing books about race. I didn't write a book on the people who were watching films on race. I wrote a book on the people who were producing the films, these major producers of ideas that the rest of us consume. And I studied, like, why were they producing these ideas at this time? Why did John C. Calhoun, US Senator from South Carolina, stand up before the Senate in 1837 and say that slavery is a positive good? Why did John McWhorter, Columbia professor now, after Obama was elected, state that we're now living in a post-racial society? Why did these people do these things? And I found over and over again that these people were not ignorant and hateful. They literally, and oftentimes, were quite brilliant. What was causing them to produce racist ideas was racist policies. In other words, racist policies and the need to justify and maintain those policies and defend those policies were creating racist ideas. And the production of racist ideas and their circulation and our ultimate consumption is what led to our ignorance and hate. And so now we begin to realize why we've spent a lot of time, racial reformers, trying to educate away the racist ideas of the powerful on the precept that if they'll only won't have those racist ideas, they will stop initiating or defending those racist policies. No, they created those racist policies not out of racist ideas, but out of self-interest. They benefited them economically, politically, culturally. And that's why they produced those policies, and they ended up creating racist ideas to defend them. I like to sort of compare it to racist ideas are almost like the PR arm, the public relations arm of the company of racist policies, and their products, which are racial disparities. So what that means is that if we really want to get rid of racist ideas, we have to eliminate the company, racist policies. Thank you.